Welcome to Sakshi TV's special immigration talk show with Attorney. I'm Preeti Mulbagal, your host for the show. Today we have with us Ms. Saimithra Reddy, Managing Attorney and founder of Mitra Law Firm based in Chicago. She studied at the Northeastern University School of Law in Boston and has extensive experience working with immigrants all around the world and with the Indian population, specifically on issues affecting not only the F1 and H1B visa holders, but also the detained by ICE and in immigration court hearings before the immigration judges. Ms. Mitra, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today's topic of discussion, immigration visa revocations. So we've seen reports of recent immigrant visa revocations. Can you briefly explain what's happening?
Yes, sure. Like you just said, we are seeing an increase in the number of visas that are being revoked, either by the Department of State through the U.S. consulates or even by USCIS. And unfortunately, a lot of these visa revocations are happening to people who have already left the United States and are in their home country, making it very difficult for them to be able to return back to the U.S.
What types of immigrant visas are being most affected, like family-based, employment-based, or diversity visas, etc.?
I would say the highest number of visas that we're seeing being affected are F1 student visas and closely followed by H1B visas. Family-based visas, once you get a green card and become a permanent resident, those revocations are less and they're much harder for the US government to revoke. But the visas that are most being affected are F1 visas and H1B visas.
Okay. So are these revocations tied to any recent policy changes, executive actions, or agency guidance?
That's a great question. I would say definitely yes. In this administration, there is a very strict crackdown on visa fraud and generally immigration overall. Actually, last year in around August, the Department of State announced that there are around 55 million US visa holders currently, and that they will be doing a screening of all 55 million visa holders to see if there are any visa violations, any fraud in obtaining the visa, any visa overstays. So if they find any issue with any of the visa holders who are currently in the United States, then they would revoke it. And as we've been seeing last year and as recently as last month, there is now an expanded increase in screening and vetting of visa applicants' social media and online presence. So that is the latest policy that is causing a lot more information to be seen and viewed, and thus visas being revoked.
Okay, so which government agencies have the authority to revoke immigrant visas and under what laws?
Sure. Largely, these visas are being revoked by the Department of State. The Department of State oversees all of the U.S. consulates that are abroad. So likely if you have applied for a visa, you are outside of the United States and you are applying for a visa to be able to come into the United States. So for that, you have to visit a U.S. consulate, go through an interview, and get a visa stamp in your passport. So those consulate officers who have the power to issue a visa to you also have the same power to revoke a visa for a wide variety of reasons. It is largely a power that is under the Department of State. However, if you have obtained a visa while living in the United States, most commonly, let's take, for example, an F1 student living in the US who gets picked in the H1B lottery, and they're eligible to change their status while living in the United States, and they become an H1B visa holder. That kind of visa is issued by USCIS, and therefore USCIS has the authority to revoke an H1B visa that they issued. They can revoke visas for inadmissibility issues. If, for example, you overstayed your visa and you have started living here unlawfully, that makes you inadmissible. If you commit any crimes, you can become deportable based on your criminal or arrest history. That's also another reason that USCIS or the Department of State can revoke an already approved visa.
Okay, so at what stages can a visa be revoked? Like before entry, after entry, or even after the green card issuance?
Yeah, so it can be revoked at any stage. Before you're entering the United States, a consular officer could approve the visa, and then as soon as the very next day, if any new harmful information comes to light regarding your case or your visa, they could revoke it right before you even enter into the US. CBP officers, the Custom and Border Patrol officers at every US port of entry, when you come to the airport and you pass through Customs and Border Patrol, they have the authority to revoke your visa while you are trying to enter into the United States. And even if you've entered the United States and you're living here, even at that point, your visa could be revoked. So it can be before, during entry, or even while you're living here.
Okay, can happen anytime.
Yeah.
So, what is the difference between a visa revocation and rescission of permanent residence?
It's actually quite a big difference. A visa is temporary, right? A visa allows you to stay in the United States for a certain amount of time. A visa has an expiry date. After the expiry date, you either have to go through an interview or some process to be able to get another visa. For a green card, the standard to even get a green card and become a permanent resident is much, much higher. You have to show that you have lived here in the United States for a certain number of years. You are eligible in some means, you're a person of good moral character. So there's a very high standard and a very strict vetting process for one to even get permanent residency. So it's harder, definitely, and there are more rare cases of the US government revoking one's permanent residency after being granted. However, for visas, because they are so temporary in nature, USCIS or the Department of State can revoke a visa for so many reasons. If you've been arrested but not even found guilty or convicted, just solely on the basis of an arrest, a visa can be revoked. If you have overstayed your visa, it can be revoked. So there are various reasons, and it's easier for a visa to be revoked versus a permanent residency, or otherwise known as a green card, to be rescinded.
Okay. So, are the visa holders typically notified before a revocation or does it happen without a warning?
Fortunately, it happens without a warning. The most common way that we're seeing visa holders being notified of their revocation is via email. You will get an email directly from the US consulate abroad, which issued your visa in the first place. For example, if you got your F1 visa issued from the US consulate in Delhi, then they will send you an email directly stating that your visa is being revoked and for what reason. You are not given any sort of warning or 10-day notification period that your visa will get revoked. It's usually that your visa has been revoked.
Past misrepresentations or omissions during the visa process a major factor?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, all current visa holders are being screened and vetted. They are reopening already approved and issued visas to see if there has been any misrepresentations made in the past. If they find that you have made misrepresentations, if you have committed fraud, if you have provided fraudulent documents to get your visa in the first place, then those are all grounds for revocation now, regardless of when this happened, a few weeks ago, months ago, even years ago.
Can changes in employment, marital status, or sponsor eligibility trigger a revocation?
Yes. So when you change your employment, it's very, very important to keep the USCIS and US government officials updated. If you are on an H-1B visa, you absolutely need to properly file an H-1B transfer, and it needs to be approved in order for you to maintain your H-1B visa status. Similarly, if you are an F1 student and you are working through OPT or STEM OPT work authorization, every time you change your employer, you must notify your university designated school official, your DSO. If you do not properly, one, follow the requirements for what kind of employment you can and cannot engage in according to whatever visa category you hold. Or if you fail to update USCIS about your new employment, then that can absolutely lead to a visa revocation. In terms of sponsorship, Sponsors have a very limited role when it comes to sponsoring visa holders. They're essentially telling the US government that we will take care of all of the financial responsibility, we will pay all their bills, whether you're a student or any other category. Sponsorship, if you change another sponsor, that doesn't really trigger visa revocation or vice versa. There isn't much liability that a sponsor would be faced. It would be very rare for a sponsor to be sued or face any sort of criminal liability solely based on the actions of the visa holder.
That's a relief to the sponsor.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So, are the social media activities or security checks or background re-reviews playing a role in this?
Yes, absolutely. One of the policies that we briefly touched upon earlier is that increased vetting of every visa applicant's social media and online presence. So USCIS officers and consulate officers abroad are doing an in-depth search across all of your social media platforms, your LinkedIn page, any online presence you may have. So like I said, whether it's new information that's discovered or old information that now makes you ineligible for whatever visa category you have, that could definitely be a factor in revoking your visa.
So, what happens to somebody who's outside of the US when their immigration visa is being revoked?
That really is a very difficult situation, and there are certain things that you can do to prevent it. We'll touch upon that in a little bit. But if you are already outside of the United States, your visa is revoked, there is no formal process for reinstatement of your visa. There's no form that you can fill out. What you would have to do is contact the embassy directly. Whichever US consulate issued your visa and revoked your visa, you would have to contact them directly, stating why you believe that your visa was improperly or incorrectly revoked. If you have any proof, for example, if they say that you have criminal history but you don't, you can get a criminal background check done and send them those results saying my visa was incorrectly revoked and challenge that decision. Unfortunately, consulate officers have broad discretion in revoking and issuing visas. If they do revoke your visa for a valid reason, then your visa is revoked. It's better off at that point to try to apply for a new visa, get a new stamp in your passport, and then re-enter the US.
Okay. But then what happens if the person is already in the US? Does he have to go back?
Not necessarily. Just a visa revocation, if you are already in the US, simply means that your current visa is no longer valid for international travel. So that means, in basic words, that you cannot leave the United States without having to go through another interview, getting another visa stamped in your passport, and coming back. It does not impact necessarily your legal status and your legal authority to be able to stay here in the United States.
So it's not considered as an illegal stay during that period when your visa is being revoked and then before the time that you get your visa restamped.
So it depends also on which visa category you're in. For example, for F1 students, if your visa is revoked, that means you can't internationally travel. Your visa is no longer valid for travel. However, if your SEVIS is active, your student status is still active, and your university can confirm this for you, then you can stay here and continue working here with the valid work authorization. If you're on an H-1B visa and USCIS revokes your H-1B visa, then that means you don't have any legal status and you would need to either challenge that decision or apply to change your status to something else, or you would need to leave the country. So it's a different reasoning and different logic for each visa category.
Got it. Got it. That's helpful. So how do these revocations affect the dependent family members?
Yeah, so If you are a dependent family member, unfortunately, you would lose your visa and your status as soon as the primary applicant does. So if you are an H-1B visa holder and USCIS revokes your H-1B visa, if you have any dependent H-4 spouse or children, then they would lose their status as well. Even for F1 students, if you have an F2 dependent spouse or child, then they would lose their visa, but they could be able to maintain their status, as long as the primary F1 visa holder, their status is still active. So their status is still active. So likely dependents will get harmed and they will lose their visa status as well.
Okay, so there are risks of detention or removal proceedings or future inadmissibility.
If you do lose your visa status and you are no longer legally allowed to stay here, then there is a chance that ICE could detain you or put you in removal proceedings, and you might have to go in front of a judge. If you are already outside of the United States and your visa is revoked, then you would no longer be able to re-enter the United States. If a CBP officer at the port of entry revokes your visa due to some sort of fraud or violation of your immigration status, then they can put a travel ban for you. They can say that you are inadmissible to the United States for 3 years, 5 years. So there are some serious consequences to visa revocations.
Okay, so I believe you were mentioning something about being able to challenge a revocation. So could you explain more about that, please?
Sure. There are very limited ways to challenge a visa revocation. You would really have to gather documentation and evidence showing that your visa was incorrectly revoked, meaning you have information to show that the consulate incorrectly revoked your visa. For example, if you have documents, if you have a criminal history check saying that you have no arrest history, then you could provide that. There is no formal pathway to challenging a visa revocation. As I stated already, consulate officers actually have wide discretion. You cannot sue a consulate officer. You can't file any kind of form and request the consular officer to review. Even if you have all of the supporting documentation and they say, we can't take a look at this, we've already revoked it, there's not much you can do besides to apply for a brand new visa.
So is there a difference in due process rights for consular revocations versus USCIS actions?
Absolutely. I think consular revocations are much harder to challenge due to the nature of how much discretion a consular officer has, how much power they have. Versus a USCIS officer, if they revoke your visa, then they give you the option to usually file some sort of motion to reopen the case or reconsider. So there is a formal pathway in which you can challenge a visa revocation made by a USCIS officer. You can present new evidence that was not available to you before. You can work with an immigration lawyer to build a strong case as to why USCIS should actually reverse their visa revocation. There are more options if USCIS is the one that revokes your visa versus a consular officer at a US consulate abroad.
Okay, so how does the doctrine of consular non-reviewability affect these cases?
So the consular non-reviewability is exactly what I've been describing as consular officers having very broad discretion. Essentially, even the US Supreme Court has found that consular officers have a lot of power to make a decision on a visa based on any information they have now or any information they get in the future. So once they make that decision is final. There's no appeal process. There's no legal way to challenge that. So that is generally the policy of consular non-reviewability. A consular officer is not required to review their decision and give a new decision.
Okay, so there is a term for it. Understood.
Yeah.
So what immediate steps should someone take if their immigrant visa is revoked?
So one, it depends on where you are. Are you in the United States or have you left the United States and you are in your home country or outside of the United States? In either scenario, absolutely reach out to an immigration attorney right away to see what next steps can be taken. So are there any legal pathways for you to challenge the revocation? What kind of documentation do you need to start gathering to show that your visa was incorrectly revoked? Or if you need to apply for another visa, working with an immigration attorney to strategize. Should you apply for the same type of visa again that was already revoked? Should you apply for a different category of visa? How do you prepare for the interview if you have to apply for a new visa? So working with an immigration attorney is crucial in such a scenario where your visa is revoked.
Oh, okay. So are waivers or motions to reopen available in these situations?
So if the visa is revoked by USCIS, yes, usually you have a limited window around 30 days to file a motion to reopen or reconsider. So it is a very tight timeline, which is why it's very crucial to work with an experienced professional who can put together the legal memorandum, arguing the points of law, why a visa should be reinstated, also gathering all of the required documentation.
So when does it make sense to reapply versus challenge the revocation?
If you have solid proof or evidence that your visa was wrongfully revoked, and it was actually revoked in error, then it makes sense to challenge the visa revocation. If you have documentation, written documentation and proof to show that the visa was incorrectly revoked, then definitely try to challenge it. If it was revoked for a valid reason, for example, you overstayed your visa, you committed any crimes, you were found guilty of a crime, or you have a conviction, any valid reason, then in that case, it's not really worth challenging it. It makes sense in those scenarios to just apply for a new visa.
Okay, so are sponsors exposed to legal or financial liability? You've mentioned that they are not usually, right? It's very
Yeah,
rare.
they're not. It's in very, very rare scenarios that a sponsor would be subject to any kind of legal issues or financial issues due to the actions of the visa holder that have caused the visa to be revoked. The only rare scenario in which a sponsor might be held liable is if they knew about some sort of immigration fraud that the visa holder is committing and they also engage in that fraud. They misrepresent some information to USCIS or they help the immigrant commit fraud. In those cases, very rare cases, there might be some liability. Otherwise, generally, no.
So how can sponsors help prevent issues that may lead to the revocation?
I think that's quite difficult. A lot of sponsors have a very limited role in helping out the people that are applying for these visas. Their role is pretty limited to financially sponsoring. I think if you are an elderly person who is helping an F1 student, a young student, I think the best path would be to advise them not to engage in any unauthorized work or commit any criminal offenses, have any encounters with law enforcement, get into any trouble. So just to provide them with that kind of advice. But a lot of the times the sponsor actually doesn't know what is going on with the visa holder and what things that the visa holder is doing. So I'm sure it might be a surprise to the sponsor as well when the visa holder's visa is revoked.
Okay. So then what proactive steps can the applicants take to reduce the risk of visa revocation?
So definitely the most important thing you can do if you are in the United States or you are planning to come to the United States on a visa is to know what is allowed and what is not allowed according to your visa. Most importantly, work. What kind of employment can you engage in depending on what visa you have? So if you violate the terms of your visa by engaging in unauthorized work or work that is outside of the scope allowed by your visa, then that could lead to a visa revocation. Secondly, do not get into trouble with the law, right? Respect the laws of the United States. Don't break any laws. Don't have any encounters with law enforcement, whether it's getting pulled over for drinking and driving or committing any kind of criminal acts. So if you stay away from law enforcement and you follow the laws of the US, then you will be fine. So make sure you know what is allowed within your visa and make sure you generally follow all of the laws in the US to make sure your visa does not get revoked.
Got it. So how important is consistency across applications, interviews, and past immigration records?
It is very important. Remember, USCIS or even the consulate officers have an entire file with your case history. Every application either you have filed or has been filed on your behalf by someone else, and every statement ever made during an interview, during the port of entry to the CBP officers, every document you've provided as part of an application. All of that record is existent and accessible to any immigration officer when they review your file. So it is important to remain consistent. If you have accidentally made any misrepresentations in the past, it's important that you proactively correct it. And in this situation, working with an immigration attorney who can correct that information is very crucial.
So, Ms. Mitra, before we close, do you expect immigrant visa revocations to increase in the near future? And also, what would be the single most important piece of advice that you would give to the immigrants concerned about their visa revocation today?
Unfortunately, I do expect an increase in visa revocations in this administration. The government is being very tough on immigrants and using a very high standard of scrutiny, looking very closely at not only new applications and new visas that they intend to grant, but also already issued visas and already existing visa holders. So like I mentioned, they are going back into approved visas, reopening them and seeing whether it was wrongfully approved and then revoking them. Therefore, I do expect an increase in these visa revocations. The single most important piece of advice, I have two actually. One is know what is allowed for your visa category, maintain compliance with the requirements of your visa, and follow all the rules of the United States. Stay out of trouble to avoid visa revocations. And two, if you have any complex immigration history, if you've ever been arrested, if you've ever been denied a visa or denied entry into the United States, if you have any complex immigration history, absolutely work with an immigration attorney when you try to file for any kind of visa. Do not try to do it yourself. And especially before you leave the country, work with your employer, talk to your employer, inform them that you plan to leave the country, and also talk to an immigration attorney and ask them what kind of issues they might face if one is trying to leave the country and they have any kind of complexity in their immigration background.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mitra, for your valuable insights. So we will see you next week.
Thank you so much for having me.